Dudley.
You look like it.
Hey.
Oh, sorry.
Watch it. Unfortunately, he got a hold of me Sunday saying he wasn't sure he would make it here, and could I cover it? And I said it's a little late for an April Fool joke, isn't it? And he sent me this picture, and that's his Jeep snowed in Colorado. So he still thought he was going to be able to make it here. He finally got a flight out this morning, but it got delayed half an hour, so he should be landing at the airport right now and is going to try to make it here. But obviously we're not going to wait. We're going to start on going here. So we're going to skip the first couple of agenda items because he really is hoping to make it here to cover those. So we'll move on down to agenda item 3, and we'll kick it off to Joe here.
That'd be me.
That'd be you.
So 3 and 4 are carryovers from the last meeting, and I can just give you an update that the rules are going through the final approval. We anticipate them to be in place sometime in mid or late June. So there was one letter of support and one letter against the changes to the rule packet. We responded to that, and we're waiting on the commissioners to give us final approval. So there's no doubt they're going to be in place before the moratorium's lifted in September.
Okay, and any chance that moratorium will be delayed, or it will end in?
You know, and you're like the second or third person to ask me. That would have to be legislatively done, and the legislators are not in session until January. So, yeah, I think that, and this is Joe Schmieder speaking, but the rules address the concerns of the legislators, which gave us the moratorium. So we've addressed the concerns by putting new standards in place. So I would be surprised if there would be a need to do another moratorium. But keep in mind, there's still that moratorium in place for Medicare out in the Houston area, and I haven't heard one way or the other from anybody. We didn't know until the day that it happened, and they extended it another 6 months.
Thank you. Let's see, that's for numbers 3 and 4. Number 5, Mr. Vance, you're up.
They didn't start your clock.
I know.
Alrighty, well, good afternoon. So the first thing I want to just bring to your attention that I've spoken with a couple of you about, I know I've spoken to Justin and to Dudley about it, that I mentioned in the Medical Directors Committee meeting, is we have developed a work group to look at a voluntary pediatric EMS recognition program that would recognize an EMS agency for things such as carrying proper pediatric equipment, having pediatric protocols, having pediatric continuing education, and doing pediatric community outreach, things such as car seat safety checks, bicycle helmet safety, that type of thing. As it would be a kind of a 3-tiered thing that we're looking at right now. Actually, Chris is on our work group, so he could fill you in. Sorry, Chris, not throwing you under the bus, but yeah, well, I'll get to you next. But, anyway, so it would be a kind of 3-tiered system, you know, the equipment and protocols, then the education, and then the community outreach. And you would receive recognition for each one of those. We haven't really discussed how that would happen yet, but you would receive a certificate from the EMS for Children program, and would also receive decals that you could put on your trucks if you wanted. And you can make a PR deal out of that, where you would invite the local paper, TV, or you could just put it on your own website or newsletter. But you can make a PR deal out of to let the community know what you're doing. And I can tell you that the programs that we're basing this off of, it's been very popular in those areas, and especially with the communities. And when your community sees it and sees the neighboring department doing it, a lot of times those communities want to know why your department's not doing it. So, but a lot of it is, it's very simple. It's 99% of the departments throughout the state are already doing most, if not all of this stuff. So I see it as very easy. And like I said, I spoke with Justin about this back in February, and Justin did volunteer RAC A to pilot the program. If you're still willing to do that, we'll still hit you up on it. All right, well, great, we appreciate it. And before we have any kind of final draft, when we're done, our little work group is done with it, I'd like to give it to the EMS committee and to the medical directors to kind of get your input on it, and before we come up with a final draft. So, the next thing, which for those who have been in all the other meetings that I've spoken at, just to remind everybody, next week is EMS week, and Wednesday of EMS week is always EMS for Children Day. We have received a gubernatorial proclamation of Wednesday, May 21st as being EMS for Children Day in the state of Texas. We will be presenting that on the steps, the south steps of the state capitol on Wednesday, May 21st at 10:30. Also, to help celebrate EMS week, we had a logo drawing contest to draw us a new logo to kind of personalize it to Texas. If you look at some of the other EMSC logos from other states, they've kind of personalized them. We put that out to the state to get votes, and I tell you, I got several hundred votes on this thing. Anyway, it was pretty overwhelming how many votes I got. But the winner is Reagan Olson. She is from Hunt County EMS up in Greenville. We'll be unveiling the logo on this next Monday. I believe that's the 19th at 6:30 in the evening. They are actually having a community event that day for EMS week and kids and the whole 9 yards. They are actually having the Dallas Mavericks cheerleaders and their mascot there, and they're actually providing them a DJ too, so that's kind of neat. Then Friday of next week on EMS week, we are doing our annual EMS for Children Crew of the Year Award. This year the award goes to a crew from Marble Falls EMS and Horseshoe Bay Fire Department for I believe he was 3-year-old that was shot in the chest. But it was a great, this call was a great example of how the EMS and trauma system works, from first responders to the ambulance to the emergency department and to discharge. So that is at 10 a.m. up in Horseshoe Bay on Friday. So, y'all have any questions?
Anybody got any questions?
Eddie? No? Okay. All right, well, you look like you were going to say something. So.
I just want to commend RAC A for volunteering.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it.
I just wanted to.
All righty, well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 6, update on the revisions to chapter 157.
That'd be me.
That'd be you.
So we're making some great progress. We're through 11, and the definitions. We're going into other chapters. The plan is to have it completed with a presentation at the August GETAC and committee meetings, and then hit the road with it and start fine tuning it. It won't be ready to go into any manual or anything. The process is going to be, we're going to develop it in the office. We're going to write it, do the first draft like we did with Senate Bill 8, and then take it out and gain support and adjust it as we need to. We have all the notes from all the committees over the past couple years, and they're being considered step by step through the document. So look for something at next GTAC.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's going to be the same.
Okay, we'll be sure and make that an agenda item then for the
Yes.
August meeting.
Yeah, and we'll just put it on everybody's agenda.
Okay. That'll work too.
But it might, they're going to be pretty extensive, so you may want to have unless there's something really important, that might be the agenda issue for that meeting. And the plan would be to get it to you ahead of time so you could at least seen something of it, or, well, we'll see, because it might be easier to explain the rationale before you see it so you don't jump off the bridge first. Especially Eddie, he's not as young as he used to be.
That has us all in great anticipation now.
No, it's all good.
Okay. We'll be sure and keep him tied down when it comes out. Okay. report on the work group with air providers and EMS ground. That would be Justin.
After about 2 years, we got a response from Joe, and I know Joe submitted this response to their medical committee last set of meetings, and it's there was a lot of questions and concerns to what is the relationship between a ground provider and an air provider. Also, when we're dealing with out-of-state providers versus in-state providers, and where we're picking these patients up. And lastly, the concern was, what do we do with quality assurance issues that arise when we have questions? And Joe, anytime I step off track or something, let me know, and you can correct me. But we got started in this, and one of the very first questions was we got to quality issues, and how do we direct those, and what do we do if somebody brings a patient to us and the provider or their hospitals decide, hey, we have some real problems with the way this patient's delivered. The state's formal response with that was that, first of all, you need to attempt to direct that communication back to that provider into their operational procedures, as well as DSHS wants to know. They want to be involved in that loop process and be communicated with. So we like that spelling out. We went on to talk about how would DSHS handle that, and DSHS, sure, it's okay for the ground provider or the hospital to report that back to their service, but we're not sure things are closing and it's not being directed. And that's when Joe stepped up and said, depending on the case and depending on the scenario, that's when they would attempt to contact that other state and work with wherever they're coming from in developing a relationship to look into those specific cases. There were some questions about for us on the bordering agencies, who can pick up patients, who can deliver the patient care, and we got to looking, and actually it's contained in statute that if you're moving a patient within the geographical bounds of the state of Texas, and it's not a request for mutual aid, that you have to be licensed in the state of Texas to pick that patient up. So we spent a little bit of time talking about that, thinking about how that's going to work, and how's the state going to really police this. And naturally, there's really not a good way, to do that. But when we talk about interfacility transports, and we talk about fixed wing especially, you have a relationship of a lot of people go pick up the crew from the fixed wing provider at the airport and then deliver them to the hospital to get the patient, secure the patient, and then you transport them back out to their ship or their vessel where they can forward move the patient. And we asked the question to Joe at that point, what happens when non-licensed Texas certified people are in the back of a Texas licensed ambulance providing patient care? And Joe said no. I'll just put it that way. And Joe, I'll let you continue with that context and those conversations at that point if you want to highlight any of that.
So sure. So up to this point, you're correct in everything you've said, that you have to be licensed in Texas or you're picking up. You can deliver to Texas, but if you're picking up and delivering in Texas or out of Texas, you have to have a license for that. I think the takeaway message is, if there's something wrong, unless it's so outrageous and it's very unsafe for the patient, let's get the patient transported and take care of the patient. And then follow up with the office. And then we'll have to make a determination, is it something we have true authority over, or do we have to work with the other state? And I would just ask to communicate that back to us as soon as possible, not 6 months later or a year later, saying, well, on this day, you got to give us the facts so we can jump on it quicker than later. But the real message is, if there's some kind of an issue, unless it's so outrageously dangerous, treat the patient, get them moving, get them going to where they need their care, and then let's do the work to clean it up afterwards and hold them accountable for it.
One of the things that we're seeing on New Mexico,
You got
one of the things that we're seeing on the New Mexico-Texas border where we're at is they're becoming licensed in both states. And so because otherwise they can't pick up in Texas if they're coming from New Mexico, and vice versa. We can't pick up in New Mexico unless we're New Mexico licensed. So that's going to help this matter quite a bit because they're being dual licensed in both states.
Are there other people that are seeing that with some of the air services becoming licensed in multiple states? Anybody else? It's just New Mexico.
Then there was some conversation about the patient care report in transporting the patient from the hospital out to the airport and who's in the back of the ambulance. And that was addressed by DHS as well. As you know, if that patient's in the back of a Texas licensed ambulance and there's care being provided in that ambulance, that need to make sure that all that documented care and who's providing that care per what 157.11 states is on the PCR. I know specifically in my area we've had cases where the patient care report just said care is being provided by Flight Service Eddie Martin in a big helicopter. But
Oh, I'm sorry, Eddie.
so that issue was addressed too, is to make sure that you're compliant with 157.11 and what your minimum requirements of your patient care report states it has to have.
And we're not expecting, let's say it's a BLS crew picking up a flight crew to take them from the hospital to the airport. We're not expecting the BLS crew to document that this was the care provided by the ALS crew. They push drugs, they start IV, because the patient care report reflects what you did, what your level of certification and your level of responsibility is. So, don't get yourself all hung up. And you could say that, I picked up the patient at 12:31. We put him into the ambulance in a normal manner. I drove. My partner sat front right. We went to the Joe Schmieder Airport, and ALS care was provided by Eddie Martin's Air Service. And if you can get their names, that's always helpful, so you know who the people are. But we're not expecting you or the BLS crew to document exactly everything that went on if they didn't do it. Now, if they did it, then we expect to see that.
Other than that, I think that was there was about 9 questions in that document that we asked for interpretation, and all of them were what we've talked about, and it's available if anybody would like to see it. The one question that has arisen, I know at least for me personally, is if we're meeting these out-of-state providers at the airport, or do we have an obligation to know their skill set? And we're being told right now, and Joe can address this, we're being told right now if it's inter-facility transport that's covered under the MOT, and the transferring physician is supposed to have arranged to make sure that whoever's coming to get the patient is qualified to pick up that patient. And we don't have such a concern about abandonment or transferring the patient to a lower level of care.
Yeah, I don't think we should treat the airport any different than if we brought in an ambulance from New Mexico on a mutual aid. We're not going to say, let me see your cards and all those kind of things. If it's, this truck shows up or this airplane shows up and there's no evidence, there's even a stretcher there, they're going to Velcro them to the wall, then yeah, okay, maybe we should be asking some questions. But all in all, we wouldn't do that normally on the ground. Again, if there is some concerns raised later, bring it to our attention so we can look into it.
That's about it. There are questions.
Any questions, comments from public, stakeholders? Nope. Okay. Dudley, better hurry because we're going to move through the agenda quick. The next one's an update on EMTF, but I'm betting everybody is in San Antonio on this. Is there anybody here from EMTF that wants to give any kind of update? Okay.
If I can drive from San Antonio, they can too.
I agree.
After all, and I even got in Austin traffic.
You want to do the EMTF update then, since you came from?
I wasn't at that meeting.
Okay, we will skip it then. Update on issues of drug shortages and pharmaceutical compounding. Obviously, we know there's still an issue for a lot of providers with saline and getting the saline. How many of y'all out there are still having problems with saline? So we still have a few having issues. Is there any other medications that you're having a hard time getting for your EMS agency? So it looks like only a couple, so I guess then everybody else is doing okay on
The saline should be lightening up only because the FDA approved the Denmark company for 6 months to ship a lot of saline over here and all that kind of stuff. So I think that helped on taking the shortage away.
Okay.
It's not going yet, but it's helping.
I'm impressed they did that.
Yeah.
Man, okay. Okay, the Trauma Systems Community Registry Work Group. A lot of times Brian Petrola gives an update on this, but he was also snowed in. So we're going to kind of tie it down into the number 12 item, which Dr. Metzger is going to give us information.
Thanks. My name is Christy Metzger, and I'm an epidemiologist. I'm the acting manager of the Injury, Epidemiology, and Surveillance branch at DSHS. And this is the branch that houses the EMS Trauma Registry. So I'm just going to give you a brief update on some of the reports that we've done. And I've given this presentation a couple times, so I apologize if you've seen it before. But the good news is that Chris Drucker is going to present additional data that you'll be interested in as well. So in the 2014, this is just the number of records that we have received so far. So far this year, we've received just over 355,000 runs, and these have been reported by just over 400 entities. There is the legislation says that EMS agencies have 90 days to report after the run date. They tend to report sooner than that, so that is reflected in this monthly count. Trauma records tend to be about 10% of all runs reported into the system. If you're interested in some of the data that we have been pulling out of the system, we've produced summary reports for EMS and for hospital and for pediatric hospital trauma cases that have been reported into the system. On our homepage, which is the main DSHS homepage /injury, the very top link says updated state summary reports for EMS and hospital. You can click on there to go to the link for the reports. There's also, along the left-hand side, there's a data and statistics link, and that will take you to this page, which also has several of the reports. This is just a screen grab of those particular pages. Again, there's statewide reports and there's RAC level reports so that you can look and see how your own RAC is doing and compare it to other RACs as you see fit or the state. In each of those RAC level reports, it also has the entities that contributed data. So we encourage you to look at these reports, and we want your feedback. These reports have been generated based on conversations with stakeholders about what some of you want. We want to know more about what others of you want as well. The summary reports are definitely snapshots of registry data. These are annual reports, and this is based on 2013 data that was pulled this spring. It is provisional. We do expect to receive more 2013 data over the next several months, at which point we will rerun these reports, hopefully with some of the feedback that you give us. The summary reports we do tend to produce on a regular basis. These would be annually, but we also would like to produce more special analyses. We have a couple up on the website right now about submersion and mechanism of injury among hospital traumas that have been reported. These special analyses we anticipate being more focused, more in depth, topical or certain data elements, and generated more periodically based on interest from the stakeholders. We, again, encourage you to look at the reports that are up on the site, and we would like your feedback. Basically, we really want to know what you want to know and how you can use these data in your work. and how you would like the data presented. Do you like tables? Do you like graphs? You know, none of us are graphic artists, but but we try our best to at least make the graphs useful. And if you would like to send us comments, please send those comments to our email address for the program, which is injury.web@dshs.state.tx.us. If you want other data that are not included in the state summary reports that are up on the website right now, please let us know. Again, send the email to the injury.web address, and one of the epidemiologists will talk to you and get clarification on what you want and if the data we have will be sufficient to answer your question. And our goal is to prepare that data request or those data analyses for you within 10 business days. Obviously, the more complicated reports will take longer. Some of the more simple ones could take less amount of time, but that's our goal right now. And if is there any questions about reports before I turn it over to Chris?
In that information, you say we can request. I see that you've got it broken down by trauma service area.
Right.
Is it possible to break that data down by call volume? As far as, a lot of times if I'm a small service, I don't want to compare my times and my information against the larger services that are running 40,000 calls a year or 15,000 calls a year, but I may want to compare my data against, in other parts of the state, against services that are running similar volumes. Is that a possibility?
Oh, that's really interesting. I think we should entertain that possibility, sure. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Drucker. He's our team lead for the epidemiologist team, and he's going to talk more about some more specific EMS data.
Thank you, Christy. The trauma registry is moving forward. I've been here 6 months now, and in that time frame, we've been producing reports, publishing them on the web, and I feel like we're doing a good job when Joe no longer presents statistics based on Pennsylvania, but when he starts presenting statistics based on the state of Texas. So it's good to see that we're moving forward and that the data is being utilized in a way that we can improve the EMS response and the trauma system in the state of Texas. Before I talk about the reports that have been produced, felt it would be appropriate to this committee to talk a little bit about the reporting statistics for EMS agencies for 2013. On the top, you'll see a table. The table has two rows, one called the State of Texas, the other one called EMS Trauma Registry. And the columns show E911 capable services, transfer-only services, and then total EMS agencies. What we're showing you here is that in the state of Texas, there's a little over 1,000 active licensed EMS agencies. However, what you may notice from the line below is that within the EMS trauma registry, of that 1,000 plus, there are 817 active in the trauma registry. And that is something that we are currently working on. We're working on identifying which active EMS agencies are not within the registry, therefore not reporting data to us. And we're creating them within the registry. One of my colleagues, Rose Walker, who's here right now, Rose, she's been spearheading that objective for some weeks now. She's been creating entities, uploading them into the registry, been in communication with a lot of the COOs or the other leadership for these agencies so we could get them into our registry and to start reporting. The figure below shows the percentage of those services that we do have in the registry. So for E911 capable services, 98% of them are within the registry. This is not reporting, this is just in the registry. However, for transfer only though, we only have 53% of those services. A total of only 79% of active licensed EMS within our system. Now the interesting part, those who report and those who do not report. Among 911 capable services, 66% of them report data to the registry. Among transfer-only services, only 20% report data to the registry. Grand total of 53% of active EMS agencies reporting data to the trauma registry for 2013. When you look at it based on reporting, though, so those who reported and those who did not report, we see that 89% of those who reported data to the registry were 911 capable. But when you look at those who did not report to the trauma registry, we see that 51% were 911 capable services. When you start looking at the data and being here 6 months, I start understanding a little bit more about the state of Texas. I just moved there from Minnesota, where we get a lot of that snow that leads in. When you remove RAC-Q from the analysis, you see that 69% of those that do not report data to the trauma registry are 911 services. So now that we talked about those who reported, those who don't, we do get 2.5 million records to the EMS trauma registry yearly. It's roughly around 2.5 million. Overall records have dropped 7% since 2011 that have been reported to the trauma registry. We could think of it as EMS services may have been decreased, but that may not be necessarily true. But there are fewer records being reported to the trauma registry over the last several years. But with the records that we do report, that are reported to the registry, we are now producing reports to show the state of Texas and to show statistics based on the regions. Right now on the website, there are these provisional reports. They're little 3-page summary snapshots, which highlight just several data elements. There were some stakeholder feedback that went into what should be in these reports. As Christy said, we are looking for a lot more feedback so we can be able to, one, present the data that the stakeholders for the state of Texas are interested in seeing to help improve the EMS system. So the snapshots is exactly what it is. It's just a bunch of data that is thrown out there. As Christy said, none of us are graphic artists. These are quite ugly. I could say that because I created this myself. It's a lot of information tossed at you at once without much guidance. This was provisional. This was back in, I believe, February or March of this year. Since that time frame, there's been over 300,000 more records submitted to the trauma registry. So these numbers all change. And to illustrate an example of how your feedback can help generate reports that we can use or that the stakeholders can use to benchmark the state of Texas to the nation, I will talk about this top figure that you see, the very colorful one in the red, blue, and green. When it was first generated, I generated with a title of Average Patient Total Pre-Hospital Time from EMS Dispatch to Patient Drop-Off. I learned from stakeholder feedback that using the mean may not be the best way to represent this. National standards use a median because outliers can really skew the data. And the type of method in which we present the data may not be as intuitive to understand when looking at it quickly. And so what happens is we take this 2 to 3 page report based on 30 minutes worth of feedback. We were able to turn it into something a little bit more specific, a 34-page report, to be honest, to be more specific, in which data is presented both in tabular and figure form. If anyone knows what the NTDB annual report looks like, this model's just after that. And so we have data elements looking at state characteristics, patient characteristics, and EMS call characteristics that can be used to improve the EMS response in the state of Texas. One of the figures within that report, figure 11, talks about hour a day. So you get to see the call volume by time of day. This is specific for EMS calls that were trauma related. Here you see mechanisms of injuries. The top 2 mechanisms of injuries were motor vehicle traffic and fall that EMS saw and reported to the trauma registry. Here is a figure version of that table. Some individuals like to see numbers, some like to see figures. So depending on your taste, you have both in this report. But going back to that one graph in which I showed in the original provisional report, here you see the median total pre-hospital time by the top 5 mechanisms of injury as reported through EMS records for 2013. And so this is the time from EMS first gets dispatched until they arrive at the patient. arrive at the patient until they depart the scene, and then depart the scene until they arrive at the destination. And so we see, for example, motor vehicle falls, that total pre-hospital time was 36 minutes. For falls, it was 38 minutes, and so on. We break this down so you can see what it was. The blue bars represent EMS dispatch to arrival at scene. The red bars represent departure from scene to arrival at destination. Part of that little work group that helped guide this, there was a lot of talk about 20 minutes or less for EMS transport time after they pick up the patient to arrive at the destination. So we see from the top 5 for the state of Texas that departure from scene to arrival at destination is well below that 20-minute mark. Now this does not separate based on ground EMS and air EMS. I would suspect that air EMS would be much greater than ground, but that's what I suspect. That's Chris Drucker speaking. Take that from Joe. Also, scene time. We've broken down, so how long are the EMS at the scene of the event? And we see here, once again, the top 5 mechanisms of injuries and the time EMS arrived to the time they departed from the scene. So these are reports that the state of Texas are putting together with feedback from stakeholders. The purpose of these reports is to help drive the future of EMS services and response in the state of Texas and try to improve it. So we do welcome any feedback we can get as to the type of data, what the data, how you want to see it that can help your specific agency, your RAC, or the state of Texas as a whole. With that, we'll take any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Can we get that?
Is that report available on the injury website?
That report, as of right now, is not available. It will be.
Okay.
So I asked this question yesterday to Jane, and not that I want to do it again, but at what point you have the ability to start tracking who is participating in data collection and who is not? Submission. Thank you. At what point does it start becoming, does maybe the screws start getting screwed in, or there starts being calls? And I know you're gonna what can we do as a committee to help prod them, spur them, or at least give open-ended threats that's coming from the state?
To answer the first question about when can we start tracking this, we can track it now, okay? Some of the discussions that we had at REC chairs last night was that the first approach is that the registry is going to give us information on the EMS providers as well as the hospital providers by region and who's reporting and who's not. They can also give us the number of records that those providers are reporting, because there was some discussion about we felt like there might not be, from the number of records that they have now, that it appears that we're not capturing all of them, that we're not getting them all. So they can give us that. Also, what was discussed at RAC chairs is that for the EMS providers, I asked that the chairs take back to their RACs the information to the EMS providers that run affidavits would not be accepted beginning in 2016. So with that information, we're also going to be able to provide back to the RACs of those EMS providers that are submitting data to the registry, and those that are not, who are using affidavits. And interestingly enough, Chris, do you mind if I tell them this about
Sure.
the runs? Chris told me that when he compared what was in the registry from some EMS agencies and what they submitted on the affidavit is actually less than the number of runs that have been submitted into the registry, some of them as many as 5,000 runs. So go figure. Okay. So there's definitely information that we can pull out and provide to the RACs. we will be providing a communication that the RAC can use to give to the EMS providers about the run affidavit, and that we are going to stop accepting it. We're also going to reinforce that in our newsletter that is scheduled to come out sometime around the 1st of July. So we want to kind of coordinate that information coming out from the RACs to the providers along with our letter release. So that's where we're starting, Justin. Okay. Questions?
Else have any questions? Any public questions on the data submission or reports? Okay, thank you. Okay, well, he didn't make it, so we're going to jump back up to the top. Item number 1 was on the local project grant processes. For those who were here at the last GETAC meeting, this came up, and it had to do with the issue that some of the local project grants, there was a feeling that the amounts weren't keeping up with new products that were coming out, innovations, improvements to products, or just inflation in the different items. And so there was wanting to try to improve that to allow people to get better coverage or to be able to really request local project grants to get the equipment that they needed. And Joe's got an update for us on that.
So it's been corrected. The new guidance will come out in the next couple weeks, and the amounts have been increased. The amount of money has not changed going into the project, but the cost for the product is reflective of what today's costs are. And I don't want to call it priority. There's some other areas within the document that says, here's some areas you should be thinking about of improving. And I did add into that patient and provider safety, because it is a real issue. And if we don't put it out there as a priority, even we don't call it priority, but if we don't put it out there, no one's going to use it. So I think you're going to be happy. I mean, God, I wish we had more money to give you, but at least the numbers do reflect. And I can give you a prime example. The portable radio went from 5 to 5,000 because that's what it's costing you for a portable radio. And so the stuff is there. So it's going to be harder at the rack level because you're going to compete a little bit more on figuring out who's getting what. But I think you'll be okay with it. And we'll look at that on an annual basis. That'll be just a part of the things we'll do every year before sending out, so that it's staying current with trends. As certain things, something actually went down because I forget, I think it was the software for PCRs. It used to be thousands of dollars, and now you can get it for $1,000. So it's just more reflective to what today's costs are.
Joe, thank you very much. We've struggled with this for many years, and so I really appreciate your hard work to get those raised and to add the priorities.
Yeah, it was just, we all did it in the office, and it really wasn't, it's just something that, we just hadn't done, and we just needed to do it. And
thank you.
It's done.
Hey, Joe, if I remember right, one of the questions from last time was if you submit a project that is more than the available funds, there was some concern that project would be cut rather than just, say you submit for $6,000 and the acceptable reimbursement is $5,000. Can that project still move forward and that agency receive the $5,000 and contribute the other $1,000 themselves, or will those projects automatically be cut?
And I'm sure Jane will tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it's my understanding this is what we're considering the max. If you spend more than that you can do that, but this is the max that we're considering for that project and the reimbursement that we would consider. So we'll use the $5,000 example. We're going to give you 50% of that, and you paid $6,000 for it. You're only going to get 60% or 50% on the $5,000, not on the $6,000. Am I correct in saying? Yep.
I think that was the only concern, was that if for some reason we put an extra option on something and it goes over, we didn't want it to automatically be cut. If we as a local service realize we're only getting $2,500 for it, no matter how much we spend, then sure. I think that works. We didn't want it cut just because we needed to do something different with it, and it cost a little bit more.
And I'm guessing off the top of my head, but I think we took an ambulance up to like 150,000. because that's more realistic on what you're paying for an ambulance, then I think we were at 35 or 50,000, something like that.
Yeah, 60,000.
60,000, yeah.
It's pretty low.
Better
So
get a nice car.
we heard you at the last meeting, and we made the changes.
Good.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Second item. What? Aw, he's just in time for the last agenda item.
Can we call for an adjournment? Talking about a grand entrance.
Welcome back to Texas.
That's what you get for leaving.
How do you like snow, buddy?
We were just about to adjourn. Sorry. Thanks.
Great job.
We actually were to the next to last item. We saved the best for last for you. Oh no, we weren't. Never mind. Here, we'll let you catch your breath, Dr. Percy. While he finishes his cookie. Would you like to?
So this is a cookie break.
Yeah, it's a deadly cookie break.
Talk about. Well, it's also an item. I mean, you know. So thank you for letting me address the committee, and what I want to address with you about is a situation that's been ongoing. It's been sort of building up not only here in Texas but across the country. It has to do with patients who've been resuscitated from cardiac arrest and how they get treated at hospitals. And it's a conundrum. The bottom line is that there is research coming out now that's been showing that if patients who've been resuscitated out of hospital cardiac arrest, if they're taken to the cath lab acutely, pretty much right after we get them to the hospital, that they do better than had been predicted. In other words, if you consider the spectrum of patients from the 45-year-old jogger who collapses in front of a dozen other joggers, all of whom are healthcare professionals, and has a lead-fib arrest and gets immediate CPR, there's an AED nearby, and they get shocked, and EMS arrives and transports the patient to the hospital where he has some neurologic function, he's hemodynamically stable, and his 12 EKG shows a large ST elevation MI, and that patient goes to the cath lab. I think we could all lay bets that patient's probably going to do fairly well. Got immediate bystander CPR, they're otherwise healthy. At the other end of that spectrum is an elder patient with chronic medical problems, perhaps in a nursing home, who had an unwitnessed arrest, didn't get bystander CPR. Miraculously, after being found in asystole, EMS resuscitates the patient. They arrive in the emergency department. They don't have a STEMI. They're hemodynamically compromised. And if you were to take that patient to the cath lab, gee, you think, are you going to find a lesion? Are you going to make any difference? Is it going to help? So those being the two extremes, which I'm just sort of making up, what we're finding in the research that's coming out is that if you look at patients, and the most recent article came out, looked at patients who were resuscitated by a pre-hospital EMS, were brought to the hospital, were unresponsive, and did not have a STEMI on their EKG, but were taken to the cath lab anyways. Two things, a surprisingly high percentage of those patients had a correctable lesion, and more of those patients did well than had otherwise been predicted. And this is just one. There's actually a series of studies looking at this from a variety of different angles, basically finding that these patients, if treated aggressively, do well. And not only do they go to the cath lab, but if they go to the cath lab early, they do better than most people had predicted. But the problem is that when it comes to the business of healthcare, those that pay have linked your performance measures, you being the hospital or you being the cardiologist operator, they've linked your pay to your statistics. And so if you are having a disproportionately high percentage of morbidity and mortality complications, your reimbursement suffers for that. And that was designed to encourage you to be good at what you do and to be aggressive with your training and quality controls and things on those lines. But with this particular subset of patients, you can understand who, if you're the hospital or perhaps you're the interventional cardiologist, and you get the 45-year-old guy that I described before, except when he collapsed, he was not in a shockable rhythm. They did CPR on him. They got a pulse back. They get him to the hospital. He's in shock. His EKG doesn't show a STEMI. Now, are you going to take that guy? He's young. It was a witnessed arrest, but he's in shock. is 12 lead, doesn't show a STEMI. Somewhere in here, you start worrying whether or not your patient is going to hurt you in your morbidity and mortality statistics. And so in response to that, the American Heart Association, and in particular the Cardiovascular Care Committee and the Council on Cardiopulmonary Critical Care, Perioperative and Resuscitation, put together, and this was sent to y'all, I think y'all got this. It's basically their scientific statement. And this is a great compendium of all of the things that I just boiled down into a couple of comments. But it goes through all of the research that's been done over the last 3 years showing that these patients do better than had been predicted. And it also describes the conflict of interest that is created, if you will, by the way reimbursement occurs. And in the end, they basically make the recommendation, and they go through the process of arriving at basically the recommendation that your morbidity and mortality statistics be disassociated from the reimbursement equations that are used to pay hospitals. So the point of my bringing this to your attention is twofold. One is that I want to make sure that you're aware that this is going on. And you may want to go back into your communities and talk to your centers where you bring your cardiac arrest patients that you've resuscitated. And you may want to talk to them and find out what's going on. I will tell you that in my community, what I'm getting sort of anecdotally is that I've got some hospitals that are very aggressive. They're taking nearly everyone to the cath lab, and I have other hospitals that are less aggressive in doing so. And I've had some conversations. Some of them have been very uncomfortable with some folks as to, what is the deal, what's going on here. And basically what is described in this statement is exactly what's going on. Is that people find themselves between a rock and a hard place. And so number one is an awareness, and number two is to raise the question, is there anything that we from GETAC can do potentially to reinforce what the American Heart Association has said in their scientific statement from the state of Texas to add to the chorus of saying that something needs to be done about this, because what is frightening is that some of these patients who do better than expected, they return to full lifestyles. It's not a situation where we get their heart started and they wind up in a vegetative state in a long-term care facility. They're going home. They're going back to work if they're treated aggressively. And maybe not everyone's getting that level of care, and that's scary to me. So I want to bring it up for awareness and see if there's anything that we would collectively want to comment on.
Okay, thank you very much. I know y'all also spoke about this at the medical directors, and I believe they said they're going to work on putting a letter together as well to go to GETAC Council.
I don't remember exactly what the final decision was, but they're going to be talking about it as well.
Okay.
Is this a hospital-driven issue or a cardiology-driven issue?
It's driven
because
by,
of the payment?
It's driven by those that reimburse. So okay. CMS on one hand, and it's not just CMS. It's Aetna and it's United Healthcare and it's the others that are following the same rules.
But in your system, where you have some that are aggressively doing it and some not aggressively doing it, is it the physicians that are being aggressive in the one way and the physicians not being aggressive in the other? Is that where?
Too. On one hand, it's physicians, and I'm hearing from some of the physicians that they're getting pressured by the facility.
Okay.
Of course, nobody has made any official comments that I could,
Well, of course not.
They don't ever say anything on camera, right? But,
right.
So it's good.
Okay. Thank you. We'll maybe get with the medical directors council as well and see what they're going to do, and if we can help support them as well. Okay. That brings us to the review of recommendations and best practices regarding service animals and other animals encountered during ambulance transportation. Dudley?
So this was brought to me by Jeff Hayes here with the Office of the Medical Director at Austin Travis County EMS. And they had not had an issue, however, they had I think, a couple of near issues, and we're doing some best policy review or best practice review and trying to provide some guidance for the medics here in Austin Travis County regarding this, and forwarded some of the information they'd found to me and asked if we wanted to put it on the agenda, and I said, sure, I'd be happy to put it on the agenda. I think it's a somewhat important topic. I don't know if people on the committee have best practices or policies in their own practice that they do with this, if there's a plan, if you've ever considered transporting an animal in the vehicle. I think also it'd be interesting to hear from Joe and Brett about if there'd be any regulatory issues to doing that. I know our service has in the past on more than one occasion transported an animal. either with the patient or as a patient, a whole nother matter there. But so that's the reason I brought it up, and we put it on the agenda.
Well, I think it's great. I think we're going to start seeing more and more of these service animals, because now they not only have them with the blind, they have them for seizure patients, they have them for diabetic patients. I mean, they're starting to find that service animals are useful for a lot of different illnesses and diseases, and can really help predict at times. For example, when diabetics, sugar's starting to get off. So from DSHS, are there any regulatory concerns about the transporting of the animal with the patient?
You know, I'll say I haven't done a great amount of research on this topic. I don't know of any issues, and there's nothing in the rules about it. But boy, I wouldn't want to be that ambulance provider that said, no, I'm not taking that dog or that pet with me, because it would be a tough no.
Have y'all encountered any issue taking them into the hospital once you get the patient to the hospital, Dudley?
No.
You can't refuse.
That'd be my
Not
thought.
yet.
That's what I mean.
So not to open the can of worms, but this just doesn't apply to service dogs, correct? There's other animals that are considered service-oriented animals. Don't laugh, look it up, but miniature horses fit this characteristic too, for seeing and guiding.
You laugh, but it's true.
It's true.
There was actually a change in the ADA laws. I don't think miniature horses are as large of an issue as they were at one time. And then you also have the distinction between service animals, and I think that the other label is therapy animals. So the way I put it in my mind is some fly free, some don't, basically. Some can stay in a room free, some cannot. But the ADA basically says service animals go with the patient if at all possible.
And it's my understanding we can't ask for the certification, so that presents the other issue that you kind of walk on.
And Jeff forwarded me some stuff. I believe this is out of the state of New York, and it pretty much spells it out that the EMS provider may ask following type of questions, such as, is this a service dog, or does your animal have legal allowances, and is the service animal required because of a disability? But they may not ask about the nature or extent of the patient's disability, except as it relates to patient care. And so, this may be something either through Kelly's program or through the newsletter. Maybe we want to kind of look at best practices, get some information out. Maybe, Austin Travis County's done a lot of legwork. Maybe we can ask around if anybody else has. Does anybody else on the committee or in the audience have any experience with this? The service animal side, not necessarily providing service to an animal. We had that issue too.
Medical director's thing.
And this document, you scared me there, Justin, for a minute, because when you started talking about other animals, I wasn't sure what you were going to mention, but
Really?
Yeah,
we're on tape.
But this talks about birds and ponies and there was another animal, primates.
I was going to say primates, yeah.
So. Anybody from the audience care to comment? Have any guidance? Any ideas? You just think this is absolutely crazy?
Anybody actually have a policy on transporting service animals?
Or not transporting animals in the ambulance? That might be another good one too.
I know there's guidelines out there.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at one right now.
A couple documents. Did you put the documents on the website? On DSH,
I think so, yes.
On DSH's website?
I believe so.
There's
Okay.
There's a couple out there on DSH's website.
Okay, we'll see if we can get some feedback. Maybe check into Austin Travis County, see what they've got. Okay, well with that's the agenda item. So we'll open it up to general public comment. Anybody have any general comments they want to make? Anything they want to bring up? Any issues?
I think Ryan has an
I thought
announcement.
Ryan did too, and yet Ryan's ignoring me, and I'm not sure how many times I can say it to get his attention. Ryan. I was trying to stare at him, and he just wouldn't look at me.
So to be clear, I thought you were saying public comments on service animals. And I was going to be like, I got a service goat. Just saying.
Yeah, Ryan, use the one over there.
Okay, good.
That one is not really working.
That one has a cord. You can kind of walk around like a singer.
No. Okay. Yeah, so my goat joke might not have hit everyone. I have a service goat. All right, now you're up to speed. So I came up in the medical directors committee, and I'll bring it forward. If those people in the audience that are EMS providers don't realize, we're kind of on the cusp of some significant changes that would come from the reimbursement realm, but could actually have impact on the operational scope of what we do. The medical transport provider program has typically involved wheelchair and handicap accessible vehicles so that people could get to or from medical appointments. And the MTP was always synonymous with non-ambulance, but they always used the nomenclature non-emergency. The problem is non-emergency to all of us in the room has a completely different meaning. So I liken it to the old definition sheets you used to have to do in school, where you'd write a word and then you'd have to write out the definition. The problem is the word is the same, the definition is different. We have a fundamental agreement that anybody not going to the hospital for an acute emergency or an acute onset of symptoms is probably what we would consider non-emergency, and that may have no implication on whether or not lights or sirens were used, which is another form of emergency. So there's emergencies that are not scheduled. There's emergencies that are a lights and sirens response. Likewise, the non-emergency has 2, 3, 4, 5 meanings. The problem is that this reimbursement mechanism could potentially drive a wedge between what is statutorily required by DSHS through 773 and 15711 of an ambulance provider, the staffing of the vehicles. So essentially what could happen would be they want to take a very small subset of Medicaid beneficiaries and take their transportation needs and move them over to the MTP, which again historically has always meant non-ambulance. But there are some proposed rule changes that actually strike that out. There's some implications to this in that there was a law passed by Nelson, Senate Bill 10 in 2007's legislative session, that defined a stretcher transport was anyone going by stretcher, and it must be carried out in a DSHS licensed ambulance. Likewise, DSHS's rule of 2 certified people, a medical director, basic life support equipment at minimum, could all be potentially confused, not necessarily thwarted since it is the law, but confused because they actually call for 2 people, one of which has to be an attendant. Neither one has to be certified. And their disqualifying factor of it not really being an ambulance is that it doesn't have to have lights, sirens, or emergency equipment. You very rarely go to a place, even a mall, that doesn't have an AED. It's amazing to me that the very people who are supposed to look out for the beneficiaries would have something that didn't potentially look out for the medical needs of the patient. I don't think that it was purposeful. I don't think it was malicious. But as our industry is starting to confront this, we need to at least get together and say, we define a patient as such, and if you want to take somebody and not call them a patient and they're going to become a passenger, that's great, but stretchers are inherent to ambulances, whether we like it or not right now by law, and we don't want anyone to be able to more or less play in on the public's trust. I could pull up 5 ambulances out here from across the state, and unless you do a Google search or you work for DSHS or you know the provider, you can't tell me what level of service they're licensed at, how well they're equipped, what type of monitors are inside those vehicles. And so the public trust is an ambulance is an ambulance is an ambulance. Whether they're doing an MTP transport and carrying a passenger, or they're doing an interfacility or non-emergency transport, it's inconsequential. So as an industry, we have to be sure that we don't allow a funding mechanism to undercut what has been a long road for professional recognition by our peers. So really, I just want to bring it forward. There's a meeting in which you can take part on May the 22nd in which case there's a consortium of people from all kinds of alphabet soup agencies, as well as the industry itself, going to try to come up with a mechanism to make sure that they don't infringe on what has fundamentally been the basis of the provision of emergency care and emergency care and non-emergency care related to ambulances and DSHS licensed ambulances, versus a need to try to stop fraud and create a savings mechanism that would both be from people not perpetrating fraud and also a cheaper form of transportation. So I'm not here advocating one way or the other as to the development of an alternative transportation or anything like that. I'm here to tell you that we just, as an industry, need to keep our eyes on this, because we don't want to erode any sort of professionalism, and we don't want to erode something that we fought hard to do, which is put some measures in place to stop the bad actors. So that's basically the message I had to deliver.
You said May 22nd. Do you know what time and where that meeting will be?
It's 10 to noon. I believe that the flyer was posted on a couple of people's websites. The only one that jumps to mind right now is there's a Facebook account for Texas EMS Alliance, and I think it's on there. And if you can't find it, my email address is on the GETAC website, and I'll be happy to email it to you individually.
I got it here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dudley.
It's the 22nd, 10 to noon, at the Stephen F. Austin State Office Building, which is 1700 North Congress, room 170.
And there's also a RSVP attached to that.
Yes, there is an RSVP link, so that they make sure they have enough room, so they know who all's coming. And that can be found on the EMS Alliance's Facebook page, or Ryan or I'll be happy to email it to you. We kind of blasted it out. If you got that and you have your own email list, feel free to forward it on to folks, and encourage them to research the proposed new rules and come ready to talk about what we need to do to protect our industry.
And let me say one more time, I'm not here for anybody else besides I'm a provider out of Wichita Falls, Texas, and I'm certainly not trying to say that DSHS, HHSC, or anybody had any sort of malicious intent. I think that anytime you start taking something outside of a comfort level and a realm where people are familiar with certain specific operational guidelines, and you try to migrate that into different programs, it would happen any place. So I don't think that we need to address anyone involved as an adversary. I think that we need to partner with them to try to just make sure that we provide the best information so that they can provide the best care to the beneficiary.
Okay, does anyone else have any comments on this? Any questions, concerns? Okay, thank you, Ryan. Like we said, everybody who can, if you make that May 22nd meeting and pass the information along. If you don't have it, Dudley or Ryan will be happy to give it to you. Do we have any other issues that anyone wants to bring up during the general public comment section?
I have a question for Joe or Jane, either one. Do you know when the LPG grants will be available?
About 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Thank you. 2 weeks or so. I understand.
Yeah, I just remember seeing an email. It was about 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
I know in the Education Committee meeting this morning there was quite a bit of discussion on advanced paramedic, community paramedic, and them trying to develop a curriculum and work towards getting that to be an established certification. And I'd like to suggest to Dudley that we kind of make sure that EMS stays a part of that strongly. I think is going to have a huge impact on EMS in the future and the kind of services that we provide. And I'd really like to see our committee as part of that.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have anything?
Dudley, last meeting we talked about, and we were going to ask Joe, and I know it didn't make the agenda this time, but maybe next time, on reciprocity coming from another state and being licensed. And I know Joe was working on that, and we were, as I was going to try to make it an agenda item this time. It didn't. Maybe next time it needs to be an agenda item, or do you have an update?
I can at least do under announcement, public comments. This has been an ongoing issue, with the Education Committee and the Air Committee. and this committee. And just to give you an update, two things are happening. There is a national EMS compact being developed that our attorney and myself will be going to Chicago in June to get more detail on it. I've seen it a couple times. I've attended a couple meetings nationally on it. And it's very similar to the Nurses Compact. And now that will take legislation, so we can't get it into this cycle with them starting in January. So, for Texas, it'll be a couple years out. The other part of that is that I have been in communication with our neighboring states completely around, and we are on the same page, I believe, on allowing people to run and do clinical time in one state and getting credit for it in the other state. We got to work out the details on how that happens, and it'll probably require an MOU between the states. So we're meeting on June 1st and 2nd in Mississippi, and all the southern states are going to have this discussion where we're all kind of hopefully on the same page. Once we get to what I'm going to call the concept that we all agree to, then it's going to require each state to put formal MOUs together, get legal involved in those things. And at the BLS level, it's real easy. You can do it right now. It's the ALS that gets more complicated because there's such a stronger liability. So we're making some really good progress. It's not just an issue for Texas. All the surrounding states are in the same boat, because sometimes it's easier to go to your neighboring state than it is to your own state for some education, all those kind of things. So I think what we're trying to do is not have a quick fix, but get a permanent fix. And that's where we're working right now.
And that's in conjunction with the reciprocity who are already certified? And that's what I was asking.
Yeah,
maybe, Joe, let me clarify.
Already certified doing Con Ed. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to.
Well, more along the lines of you have a technician that takes the class outside the state of Texas. They go get their national registry certificate. So now they're carrying a national registry certificate. Texas currently requires that you be licensed or certified in that state before you can reciprocity into Texas.
Sure.
Is that and that was something that we talked about working on, trying to, since we're now an accredited state and
yep.
we're all playing the same sandbox.
We're having that discussion too.
Okay, anybody else have any other items they want to bring up? Committee members, y'all have anything? Nope. Okay, well, I think that's it for the agenda items.
I don't think Dudley's usually this early. It's just a thought.
Okay. Dudley, you got anything you want to add?
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. We're done.
Hey, Garrett,